If you're a fan of ball watches, you're going to like the watch that I have to show you today. It's from a brand called Zorbell, which sort of sounds like a sugar-free sorbet. I don't know why, that's how I feel, but it is a weird name, but the watch isn't. It's actually a really good looking watch that's heavily inspired, but not really a direct homage to any one ball watch. You're definitely going to see some hydrocarbon in this watch, especially because it gets a crown guard that is definitely inspired by watches like Ball. However, it's its own design. Unlike Ball, these are very affordable. I have two of them to show you. I have two different colorways. So let's take a look at two Zorbell hands-on. So here they are. I have two of them to show you guys. I have a blue dial and a green dial. This gives me Ball vibes like I was mentioning in the intro to this video. The hydrocarbon comes to mind because of that crown protector. It's a little bit different. It's actually very different from what you get from a hydrocarbon. However, gives you those vibes, the case shape. It looks a little bit like a hydrocarbon. Then the bezel also gives you those vibes as well. The bracelets, not so much. The bracelets are really nice. You have these center polished links. It's a H-link bracelet or an I-link bracelet, depending on what you want to call it. The eyes in the I-link bracelet are brushed. This is a 200-meter dive watch, I want to call it, but it's not technically a dive watch because you are not getting a dive extension or a diving clasp. So technically, I wouldn't call these dive watches. However, they're sort of extreme watches, kind of what Ball does. They make these watches that are not really dive watches. They work in all different situations, but they're weird and funky and have these little technical things and details about them that make them sort of stand out in a crowd. However, I wouldn't call them a field watch, a dress watch, or anything. You can't really put them into a category. I think that's what they were going for here. And you can't really put the dial in any one category either. You have a slotted dial. It looks like a teak dial. I guess that's what you would call it. There are lines that are going across the dial. There's a fume pattern. So it goes from almost a black to a green on this one and a black to a blue, a light blue actually, on the blue version. So it's a lot more obvious on the blue version. It's less obvious on this green version. You're getting a little bit of a green yellow accent on that seconds hand, which is an arrow. That is loomed. You have fence post hands. Those are loomed. You have applied indices. Those are loomed as well. At the 12 o'clock, you have a big large index there that is loomed and segmented. Those fence post hands are also segmented. This one has those yellow accents around the dial as well. That's at the primary indices, or actually all of the indices. Behind every single index, there's a little dot of that yellow. On the blue version, you're getting orange accents rather than the yellow accents that you're getting on the green version. The second hand, where it says the depth rating, and then those dots around the indices, those are all in an orange color rather than that yellow color. The bezel on here is mostly polished. And like I was saying before, I believe it's inspired by a hydrocarbon dive version. It's like a deep dive or something like that. I forget what it's actually called, but it is a little bit hard to grip because it is all polished and there is no knurling on the outside of the bezel. You only have these notches to catch onto with your fingers. So if you have dry hands like myself, this will be hard to turn. And let me show you. Sounds really good, but if I'm gripping the outside, it's hard for me to grip. I have to push down really hard. If I grab these sort of notch outs, I would call them, I guess, it works perfectly fine. You have a very large pip. That is a very large pip in the bezel, and it sort of flows to the dial. You can see that triangle and that bezel, that 12 o'clock, form one big shape at the top of the dial, and that's good for orientation in the dark. And obviously it looks really good as well. One other thing I want to mention about the dial, you do have their logo up at the 12 o'clock or right below the 12 o'clock, and the date is not color matched. That's because it is replacing part of the index at the 6 o'clock. So that's the reason why, but it actually gives you pretty good balance. A large index at 12 o'clock, I think it works. It balances out pretty well. Finishing overall is pretty nice on this watch. You have polished sides And then you have a very nice line of polish on the top of the case, and the top of the case itself is brushed. You have a solid case back that is really nicely finished as well, screwed in obviously because you are getting 200 meters of water resistance. Like I was mentioning before, the bracelet is really nice. However, you do get push pins or friction pins, so that is something that I do want to mention. Some people will not like that. You do have a butterfly clasp, and it sounds pretty good, pretty solid, and it has the name Zorbello right there. Zorbello is a little bit of a weird name. Zorbello sounds like a sorbet or something like that. What do you get? I got some Zorbello. I don't know. It's a little bit weird, but I guess it works. The crown protector is kind of cool. So the way it works is it's just this lever. You pull it out. There's a screw that holds it right there. So it's really nicely made. It feels really solid. Comes out really nicely. And then you can see there's a notch in the crown. The crown is notched. So when you pull out the crown and you're operating it, when you push the crown back in, you have to have that notch line up with the other notches, and then you could lock this down. And then once you have it locked down, it's very secure. This is really good for, using this in situations where you might knock your crown. If you knock the crown on here, it's going to be pretty safe. It's a little bit different from what you get from Panerai because you could actually unscrew the crown or pull the crown. They don't have screwed in crowns. And then when you close the keeper or the crown guard keeper, whatever you want to call it, it just snaps the crown back in. And that's it. So it doesn't have to be in a certain position or anything like that. This has to be in a certain position. Otherwise, you won't be able to lock it down. Size on this watch, this comes in at around 42 millimeters. That's at the bezel, at the case as well. However, you do have that crown guard, so it does wear slightly larger than that because of the extra material that you have on the side of the watch. However, it doesn't have an extremely thick case. It's around 13.5 millimeters, considering that you have a rotating bezel, sapphire crystal, and an automatic movement, screwed in case back, all of that good stuff, 200 meters of water resistance. That's not all that bad. 48.6 millimeters lug to lug. That's on a strap. If you have this on the bracelet, which I do right here, it's 51.2 millimeters, which is, again, not too crazy considering the size of the watch. So I think it would work for most wrists, or at least wrists that are around my size and maybe a little bit smaller, because you can see this actually does fold down pretty well. The lug to lug does fold down pretty well on the bracelet, and it would wear even better on a strap. So if you wanted to wear this watch, you could wear it on a strap if you have a pretty small wrist. Speaking of my wrist, today I have my Soyosa, whatever you want to call it. It's a Citizen on my 7.5-inch wrist. This is a really cool watch with a very bright yellow dial. This is a really great everyday watch, very comfortable, and I think a very good looking watch that's pretty affordable, somewhat affordable. There is the green black dial on my 7.5-inch wrist. And like I was saying, I think it looks really good on my 7.5-inch wrist. I don't think it looks big. I think it wears really nice, and it's not incredibly thick. It's around 13.5 millimeters thick, but it doesn't wear very, very thick. It's a good looking watch, very interesting watch, something that I really couldn't put into an exact category, dive watch or dress watch. It's definitely not a dress watch, but it's more of a sport watch in general, and you could do pretty much anything with something like this. And here's the blue dial on my 7.5-inch wrist. Again, black to blue, but it's a lighter blue. So you could see that fume, that degradé dial a little bit more on this watch than you could on the green dial. The green dial almost looks like a dark green dial that goes from black to a dark green. This, you could see that blue, so it's a little bit more obvious that you have a degradé dial on here. So Lume on the watch is very good, very liberally applied to the hands. The indices, you can see that the watch is working because you have a little bit of lume in that arrow on the second hand, which I really like, of course. And then you have a very large pip in that bezel. You have that triangle at the 12 o'clock, so you get orientation in the dark. You can see that your watch is the right side up, number one, and then you can see that it's working because you do have lume on that second hand. Lume is very good on this watch. The price is also very good on this watch, considering how different it is from the everyday Microbrand dive watch or sports watch that you see on the market. This is a little bit original. It's inspired by some really cool watches that aren't usually homaged, which I think is awesome. And I think the price is pretty good. This comes in at $510. I would like to see something a little bit different with the clasp, in my opinion. So this would actually be a dive watch. So you can get a little bit of adjustability, maybe a little micro adjust in the clasp here. So that would be my only complaint in general about the watch. And of course the bezel, I would like to see a little bit more grip on the bezel. I wouldn't be able to operate this bezel on a regular basis because my hands are so dry. And it does make it a little bit hard for me to actually grip this bezel because it is polished, number one, and there is no real grip on the outside of the bezel. So those are my two main complaints about this watch. Other than that, I think it's really cool and I think it's very different. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of these watches? What do you think of the brand in general? They've made a couple of different watches. They all look pretty interesting. They all get a very similar bracelet. They all get a dial that's a little bit interesting and they do different textures and patterns and things like that. So of course I do like that. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. I want to hear from you guys. Please also don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon. Super helpful for the channel and I very much appreciate it. I'll put a link to Zorbell and these watches down in the description. If you're interested, definitely check them out. Anyway, guys, thank you for logging on. I'll catch you guys in the next video.